Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. We're used to thinking of the Death Eaters as faceless henchmen of Voldemort, obedient, cruel, and devoid of free will. But is that really the whole truth? What if behind those terrifying masks there was something much deeper? Secrets, intrigues, inner factions, ancient rituals, and betrayal? Today we dive into the world of the most dangerous wizards and uncover the hidden machinery behind their recruitment, explore their sinister hierarchy, and find out how some manage to escape Azkaban. Make yourselves comfortable. Let's begin. Number 1. Where did the first Death Eaters come from? Strangely enough, the origins of this dark organization trace back to Hogwarts, the very school we associate with light and hope. It was there that a young Tom Riddle began gathering his first followers. Dumbledore himself tells us this in The Half-Blood Prince. Slytherin students, children of pure-blood families, came to school already carrying ideologies passed down from home. Gradually a core of future Death Eaters formed around Riddle, growing stronger with each passing year. Recruitment was subtle, quiet, enforced through pressure, tradition, and a doctrine of superiority. The new generation followed in the footsteps of the old. Number 2. At what age can someone become a Death Eater? Though most Death Eaters were adults, the books hint at far earlier initiations. Draco Malfoy received the Dark Mark before his 6th year. Regulus Black joined Voldemort's ranks at 16 or 17 and died at just 18. Barty Crouch Jr. was only slightly older when he landed in Azkaban. These examples point to one thing: the formal minimum age was around 15 or 16, but what lies behind that number? Perhaps a total willingness to serve, or a complete loss of fear. Number 3. Why did so many Death Eaters avoid Azkaban? After Voldemort's first fall, only a few of his followers ended up imprisoned. How was that possible? The answer lies in hypocrisy, cunning, and of course, money. Lucius Malfoy claimed he'd been under the Imperious Curse. Karkaroff betrayed his comrades. Snape was saved by Dumbledore's testimony. As for the rest, they either disappeared or bought their freedom. The system proved surprisingly lenient toward those who had a galleon in their pocket and the right contacts at the ministry. Number 4. Did the Death Eaters have a clear structure? In a way, yes, though their structure resembled a blurry pyramid. At the top stood Voldemort. Below him was an inner circle, Bellatrix, Lucius, Snape, entrusted with Horcruxes and special missions. Beneath them were active fighters bearing the mark. Further down were those who didn't bear the mark but still serve the cause. And at the bottom, external allies, officials, spies, suppliers, those intimidated or bribed. It wasn't just a club, it was an entire shadow army disguised as everyday society. Number 5. Who was Peter Pettigrew, really? At first glance, Pettigrew earned a place among Voldemort's key Death Eaters. He betrayed the Potters, performed the resurrection ritual, and may have tortured the Longbottoms. But in truth, he was despised. Even among the Dark Lord's forces, he held no respect. He became a Death Eater more out of fear than conviction. Yes, he received the Dark Mark and a silver hand, but no one trusted him with important tasks again. His place was at the very bottom. Number 6. What does the Dark Mark actually mean? The Dark Mark is a symbol of loyalty and also a tool of control. Voldemort could summon Death Eaters at any moment by touching his own mark. They would feel it: pain, burning, fear. Karkaroff trembled when his mark darkened, a sign the Dark Lord was returning. The mark wasn't just a sign, it was a reminder you no longer belong to yourself. Number 7. Why did Draco, Snape, and Pettigrew receive the mark despite their doubts? For Voldemort, the mark was a means of domination. It couldn't be removed or hidden. Perhaps that's why he branded even those he didn't fully trust, to make them vulnerable, to limit their chances of betrayal. With the mark on your arm, you couldn't easily become a double agent, at least not undetected. It was a brand, and the wizarding world knew exactly what it meant. Number 8. How many Death Eaters did Harry encounter before Book 4? Though the word Death Eater is first mentioned in Book 3, Voldemort had already been placing his people around Harry from the very start. In Book 1, we meet Quirrell. In Book 2, Lucius Malfoy. In Book 3, Pettigrew and McNair. They seemed like random characters, but later it turned out they were all part of one web. Number 9. What happens to a Death Eater's family if they fail? Failure wasn't private. Not with Voldemort. When you fell, your family fell with you. No escape, no forgiveness. He didn't punish mistakes, he punished bloodlines. Lucius Malfoy made one mistake. The diary, the prophecy, the ministry. Too many failures, too many chances wasted. Voldemort didn't scream. He didn't kill him. He did something worse. He moved in. Malfoy Manor became a prison, Voldemort's throne, his base, his message. Narcissa watched her home turn cold. Draco watched his world collapse. Voldemort gave the boy a task. Kill Dumbledore. Not as honor, as punishment, as torture, as proof of obedience. "You're not trying, are you, Draco?" he whispered. Soft. Cruel. Everyone knew what would happen if Draco refused, if he failed. It wasn't just his life on the line. It was his mother's. This was how Voldemort ruled, not with spells, with fear, with family. He didn't need to curse you. Just point to your child, your wife, your sister. That was enough. Even Bellatrix understood. Her sister Narcissa was used, humiliated, left to beg for her son's life. Bellatrix stayed silent. She knew the price of speaking out. Loyalty didn't protect anyone. Number 10. Were there women among the Death Eaters? There were women among the Death Eaters, not many, but the ones who joined were unforgettable. Voldemort didn't care about gender, he cared about fear, and they gave it to him in full. Bellatrix Lestrange was madness in motion. She didn't just follow, she worshipped. Her laughter echoed through screams. Her spells always meant pain. "You have to mean it," she told Harry. She always did. Others stepped back when she entered. Even the men, even Voldemort watched her carefully. Electo Caro wasn't as loud, but just as cruel. She taught at Hogwarts under Voldemort's rule. Forced students to watch, forced them to bleed. No lessons, just punishment, just power. Children learned more fear in her class than magic. Then there was Narcissa. No dark mark, no open violence, but still deep in the circle. She didn't fight, she lied, looked Voldemort in the eye and said Harry was dead, saved her son, saved the world. One lie, one heartbeat of rebellion. These women didn't hide behind anyone. They didn't need numbers. They were storms, wild, sharp, merciless. And when they moved, the world trembled. Number 11. What was the initiation ritual to become a Death Eater? No one wrote it down. No books, no scrolls, just shadows and scars. The initiation into the Death Eaters was a ritual soaked in fear. You didn't join, you were claimed. He was always there. Voldemort, silent, still, watching, his presence heavier than any curse. You didn't speak unless spoken to. You didn't blink. You didn't breathe wrong. One mistake, and you never left the room. The mark came next, burned straight into the skin. The pain was sharp, blinding. It crawled into your veins, forever. You screamed, or didn't. It didn't matter. He heard it either way. That snake-like face, unmoved, cold. The dark mark wasn't a gift. It was a chain. But pain wasn't enough. Loyalty had to be proved, in blood. Some were told to torture, others were to kill, a muggle, a traitor, a child. Voldemort chose. You obeyed. No questions, no hesitation. That was the real test. And not everyone passed. Bellatrix did. She smiled as she did it. Dolohov, too, without blinking, but Regulus Black. He passed once, then flinched, then ran. He tried to undo the oath, and he drowned beneath it. The sea swallowed his body. The mark stayed behind. It happened in places no one dared enter. Forest clearings lit by green light, rotten cellars under dead houses, circles drawn in ash, always quiet, always cold. And when the ritual ended, you weren't clapped on the back. You were stared at, measured, owned. You didn't speak of what you'd done, not to anyone, not even the others. Your sin was your silence. Voldemort never needed chains. He bound you in shame, in fear, in the sound of your own heartbeat after the first kill. Number 12. Were there spies or double agents among the Death Eaters? There were spies, hidden in plain sight, smiling at the table, bowing to Voldemort, lying through their teeth. The Dark Lord trusted no one, and for good reason. Severus Snape played the longest game, Death Eater, double agent, headmaster, killer, savior. He fooled them all, with silence, with precision, with pain buried so deep it looked like calm. He gave Voldemort what he needed, but he gave Dumbledore everything. "You have your mother's eyes," he told Harry. And with that, the mask cracked. He walked a razor's edge, past secrets, misdirected attacks, protected the boy he hated, because he loved the mother he lost. He killed Dumbledore with his own hand, and still he remained loyal. Not to the Dark Lord, to Lily, always Lily. But he wasn't the only one. Igor Karkaroff betrayed everyone, stood in the courtroom and spilled names. Antonin Dolohov, Mulciber, Travers. His voice shook. He begged for mercy. The ministry let him go. Voldemort did not. They found his body in a shack, frost-bitten and marked. He didn't last long. Other spies were never named. A werewolf who passed whispers, a clerk in the ministry who left files behind, a healer who faked deaths for the order, ghosts in the system, saving lives without ever drawing a wand. Inside the ranks no one trusted anyone. The Death Eaters watched each other like predators. Who hesitated, who flinched, who asked questions. One slip, and you vanished, dragged away in the night, tortured, killed, forgotten. Voldemort tried to control it, hoarded secrets, split his soul, lied even to those closest to him. He trusted no one, not Bellatrix, not Lucius, not even Snape, not really, but he never imagined where the final blow would come from. Number 13. Why didn't some pure-blood families join the Death Eaters? Not all pure bloods bowed. Some chose to fight, some chose to feel. Voldemort preached unity, purity, power, but not everyone listened. Not everyone wanted to hate. The Weasleys said no, loudly, proudly. Arthur loved Muggles, protected them, studied their plugs and batteries like sacred relics. Molly stood by him. She raised her children to care, not conquer, to protect, not destroy. They were mocked. "Blood traitors!" Lucius Malfoy spat. The insult stuck. But the Weasleys didn't flinch. Fred and George turned it into a joke. Ron wore it like a badge. Ginny, she hexed anyone who said it to her face. They stood with Harry, with the light. It came at a price. The burrow was burned. Arthur was bitten by Nagini. Percy almost lost his soul, chasing ministry lies, but still, they didn't break. They kept fighting, kept laughing, kept loving. That made them dangerous. Frank and Alice Longbottom stood too. They were warriors, auras, brave to the bone. Bellatrix Lestrange didn't break their bodies. She shattered their minds, tortured them into silence, left them breathing, but gone. Still, they never gave her what she wanted. Other families stayed quiet, not out of fear, out of disgust. They saw what Voldemort did, the cruelty, the chaos, children murdered, homes destroyed. That wasn't pride, that wasn't power, that was madness, and they refused to join it. But Voldemort didn't allow silence, Refuse him, and you were the enemy. Decline the mark, and you signed your own death sentence. There was no middle, only loyalty or war. Mercy wasn't part of his plan. The families who resisted were few, but they were loud, they were strong. They reminded the world that blood didn't define you, choices did, and sometimes the bravest thing a pureblood could do was stand alone. Number 14. Were there rules even Death Eaters couldn't break? There were rules, unspoken, unbreakable. Even monsters need order. And in Voldemort's world, one rule towered above the rest: loyalty. Absolute, untouched. One flicker of doubt and you were gone, not vanished, destroyed. Regulus Black knew he had the mark, he swore the oath, but then he saw the truth, the Horcruxes, and he turned, stole one, replaced it, and walked to his death, alone, no escape, no plea, just silence. That was the price for disobedience. The Horcruxes were sacred, secret. Voldemort never explained them, not even to Bellatrix, not to Lucius. He handed them artifacts, yes, the diary, the cup, but never told them what they were holding. A fragment of his soul, a piece of his immortality. Knowledge was danger, and Voldemort never gave power he couldn't control. Lucius learned that too late. He used the diary, not carefully, not wisely. It was destroyed, and so was his standing. Voldemort didn't scream. He didn't need to. Lucius was stripped of trust, left to wither. That's how Voldemort punished, slowly, coldly. Leaving was death. No one walked away. The dark mark burned forever. It wasn't a symbol. It was a sentence, branded into flesh, into life. There was no redemption, no retirement, just one way out, a grave. Igor Karkaroff ran. He named names, sold out his own, thought he could buy freedom. The Ministry agreed. Voldemort didn't. He will not be left to live, Snape said, and he wasn't. They found him frozen, the dark mark scorched above, a warning, betrayal, never slept. Sometimes punishment came from within. Bellatrix didn't wait for orders. During a raid, she struck Travers for hesitating. "You dare tremble?" she hissed, her voice like glass. In that world, even fear was treason. You flinched, you died. Number 15. Who was the most loyal Death Eater? She didn't follow him, she worshipped him. Bellatrix Lestrange wasn't just a Death Eater. She was Voldemort's most devoted creation. Where others served, she adored. Where others hesitated, she killed. Her loyalty wasn't obedience, it was obsession. 14 years in Azkaban didn't break her, it sharpened her. While others rotted, she smiled in the dark, waited, whispered his name through the bars. When she walked free, she was more dangerous than ever. Mad, yes, but with purpose. She killed Sirius Black with joy. "I killed Sirius Black," she screamed, laughing as if she'd won a prize. That wasn't battle, that was love. She didn't care that he was family. He stood in the way. That was enough. Voldemort trusted her like no one else. She guarded one of his Horcruxes, Helga Hufflepuff's cup. Buried deep in the Lestrange vault, protected by dragons and curses, he gave it to her. Not Snape, not Lucius, Bellatrix. When she tortured Hermione at Malfoy Manor, she was cold, focused, cruel. She carved into her skin to protect Voldemort's secrets. Her madness had direction. It served him. Every scream was a sacrifice, every act a prayer. In the final battle, she fought beside him, not behind, beside. His words to her were quiet, personal. Come. No title, no order, just her name in his voice. She didn't fear death, only his silence. Bellatrix didn't want power, she wanted him. That made her unstoppable. Number 16. Did any Death Eaters regret their actions? In the dark and unforgiving world of the Death Eaters, where loyalty was enforced by fear and betrayal meant death, it seems almost impossible to imagine regret. These were not men and women known for mercy or doubt. They tortured, killed, and followed a master whose very name brought terror. Yet even in that world of shadows, a few began to question the path they had chosen. Among them, the name of Regulus Black stands alone, a Death Eater who did more than regret. He acted. Regulus was the younger brother of Sirius Black, a man who rejected the values of their pure-blood supremacist family. But while Sirius fled from the darkness, Regulus ran straight into it. At 16, he joined the Death Eaters, his name inscribed among the damned. To those outside, it may have seemed a cowardly attempt to gain favor with Lord Voldemort or to uphold the Black family's pure blood pride. But for Regulus, it was more complicated. "My poor darling boy," his mother, Walburga, once cried when speaking of him. He died for the noble cause. To understand Regulus's regret, one must understand what drew him in. He grew up in a house where portraits hissed about Muggle filth, where blood purity was holy, and where children were told that power came from domination. Voldemort's ideology was the logical conclusion of everything he was raised to believe. So when the Dark Lord offered a place among his followers, Regulus accepted not with hesitation, but pride. But somewhere along the way something broke. It is not known exactly when Regulus began to question Voldemort's vision. The books do not give us his diary nor his direct voice. But what we know comes from Kreacher, the Black family's loyal house elf, who was with him in the end. As Kreacher recounted in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Voldemort used him to test protections on one of his Horcruxes. Kreacher was dragged to a dark, hidden cave, forced to drink a potion that caused unbearable pain, and left to die. But he didn't die. He returned because Regulus had ordered him to come back. And that was the moment Regulus saw the truth. He had once believed Voldemort was a savior of wizard kind. Now he saw a monster. The Dark Lord had used and nearly killed Kreacher without a second thought. To someone like Voldemort, house elves were disposable, just like any follower who outlived their usefulness. He never cared about any of us, Regulus must have thought, and perhaps in that moment he saw his own fate. If even a pure-blood servant could be discarded, what chance did he have? Regulus did not scream or run or write angry letters. He did something few Death Eaters ever did. He chose to fight back. Silently, deliberately, he planned his betrayal. He learned about the Horcrux, that Voldemort had hidden part of his soul in a locket. Regulus ordered Kreacher to take him back to the cave. There he drank the same potion Kreacher had endured. Master Regulus drank all the potion, Kreacher said, his voice trembling. He told Kreacher to take the locket and go, and he was pulled into the water by the Inferi. He was only 18 years old. What makes Regulus's story so haunting is how quietly it happened. He didn't seek glory. No one knew. His name was never cleared. The family believed he died nobly in service to the Dark Lord. Only Kreacher knew the truth. Only he carried the weight of that final night in the cave. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione learned the story, they were stunned. "He was a Death Eater?" Harry asked. "Yes," said Kreacher, "but he changed his mind. It's a line that defines everything. But he changed his mind." In a world where most Death Eaters followed Voldemort until death, Regulus turned back, not just in regret, but in defiance. He didn't merely feel sorry, he acted on it. That is rare. One might wonder, were there others? Snape, of course, is the most famous example of a Death Eater who turned, but his story was different. His regret was rooted in love, in the death of Lily Potter. Regulus's regret seemed born from principle, not love, not self-interest, a realization that the ideology he believed in was rotten to the core, that Voldemort was not a leader but a parasite, feeding on fear, lies, and blood. The story of Regulus also forces us to consider the quiet tragedies. Sirius never knew what his brother had done. He died believing Regulus was just another loyal pawn of Voldemort. What would he have said if he knew? Would he have forgiven him? Would he have mourned him differently? One can imagine Sirius looking at the old family tapestry in Grimmauld Place, where Regulus's name was burned in gold thread, and feeling something like guilt. Regulus did not live to see Voldemort fall. He never knew if his actions made a difference. For years the false Horcrux lay untouched. The locket sat hidden in Grimmauld Place, surrounded by dust and silence. It wasn't until Harry and his friends arrived that the puzzle began to unravel. And when Creature, moved by Harry's kindness, told the story of Regulus, it felt like an echo from the past, finally heard. J.K. Rowling never gave us Regulus's thoughts, but we can imagine them. We can imagine him standing at the edge of the cave, holding the locket, knowing he was walking to his death. Perhaps he whispered something. Perhaps he said, "This is not who I want to be." Perhaps he thought of Sirius, running away from home, always defiant. Perhaps in that moment he became more like his brother than he had ever been in life. The power of Regulus's story lies not in grand speeches or duels, but in choice. A young man raised in a house of darkness stepped into deeper darkness to defy a tyrant. He had no wand to raise against Voldemort, only a stolen locket, only courage, and in that he showed more bravery than many who fought in open battle. Number 17. Could Death Eaters produce a Patronus? In the shadowed corners of the wizarding world, few spells gleam with as much brilliance as the Patronus charm. A silver guardian, born of pure emotion, the Patronus is summoned not with words alone, but with hope, true, unclouded, untainted hope. And yet hope is not a currency that Death Eaters carry. As loyal followers of Lord Voldemort, they thrived on fear, hatred, and ambition. The very essence of the spell stands in opposition to everything the Death Eaters represented. Still, one cannot help but ask, were any of them ever capable of producing a Patronus? J.K. Rowling herself confirmed that it is extremely unlikely that a Death Eater could cast a full corporeal Patronus. But within that phrasing lies a faint shimmer of possibility. Extremely unlikely is not the same as impossible. This linguistic nuance has left space for fans to explore the edges of canon, where one figure looms in contrast to all others: Severus Snape. Snape, the double agent whose heart bore a secret too heavy for most men to carry, was able to conjure a Patronus. Not just any Patronus, but a doe, the same as Lily Potter's. His ability to summon it, despite his affiliations with the Dark Lord, suggests a rare and deeply rooted exception. It wasn't loyalty to Voldemort that gave him strength. It was love, unanswered, unwavering, and ultimately redemptive. As Dumbledore remarked, with a rare tremble in his voice, "After all this time?" Snape answered simply, "Always." This Patronus was not just a magical defense. It was a tether to a memory so powerful that it could not be corrupted by the darkness in which he walked. Snape's case is singular. He was, after all, a Death Eater by choice, but not by nature. The rest of Voldemort's followers were driven by very different motives: power, cruelty, ideology, and in some cases simple fear. Consider Bellatrix Lestrange. A witch of formidable power, unshakable loyalty to Voldemort, and terrifying cruelty, Bellatrix seemed incapable of affection or joy that wasn't rooted in domination. Her cackling laugh in the Department of Mysteries was not the laughter of happiness, but of madness. Her emotions were twisted, her soul stained with the torment she inflicted. Could she summon a Patronus? Almost certainly not. For her, love was submission, and joy was destruction. Neither emotion fits the requirements of this ancient spell. Draco Malfoy presents a more ambiguous case. Born into a family steeped in pureblood supremacy, Draco's initiation into the ranks of the Death Eaters was more the result of lineage and pressure than personal conviction. During his 6th year at Hogwarts, burdened with the impossible task of assassinating Dumbledore, Draco showed fear, hesitation, even remorse. These glimpses of vulnerability suggest that a younger, freer Draco might have been capable of conjuring a Patronus. But by the time the war was upon him, he was too deeply entrenched in fear and confusion. The Patronus requires clarity, a singular, pure memory. Draco's thoughts were fractured, clouded by guilt and dread. No record exists of him producing one. The nature of the Patronus is inherently defensive. It wards off Dementors, creatures that feed on despair. For a Death Eater, despair is not an affliction, it is a tool. They thrive in chaos, often becoming the very source of the fear that summons Dementors in the first place. There is poetic irony in this. The same creatures that terrify others may find nothing to drain from the Death Eaters, because many of them have long since surrendered their humanity. Lucius Malfoy, another prominent Death Eater, offers no known Patronus. Though powerful and influential, Lucius is characterized by cunning, not warmth. His emotions are strategic. His smile is thin, calculated. In The Order of the Phoenix, Lucius leads the attack on the Department of Mysteries without hesitation. No affection guides his hand, only ambition. When Voldemort fell, Lucius's fear outweighed his loyalty. Could a man like that, driven by preservation and status, summon a Patronus? It seems unlikely. Yet not all who bore the dark mark were incapable of deep feeling. Regulus Black, younger brother to Sirius, once a loyal Death Eater, turned against Voldemort in silence and died trying to destroy a Horcrux. In his last letter, discovered years later by Harry and friends, he wrote, "I have stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it as soon as I can." Regulus's actions were courageous, even self-sacrificing. Had he lived, had he been trained further in advanced magic, perhaps a Patronus might have flickered from his wand, but we will never know. The technicality lies in the mechanism of the spell. According to the prisoner of Azkaban, to conjure a Patronus, you must think of a single, very happy memory. But the emotion behind the memory must be genuine, not forced. For most Death Eaters, even if a happy memory existed, it was tainted by malice or dominance. Antonin Dolohov, for instance, was a sadist. His pleasure was found in pain, his satisfaction in obedience. The joy he experienced was incompatible with the light needed to manifest a Patronus. Even the spell itself resists corruption. Expecto Patronum is ancient, its roots tied to pure protective magic. It is not a curse, nor a weapon in the traditional sense. It is the projection of one's innermost strength and purity. It cannot be faked. When Umbridge, a cruel and petty tyrant, uses a Patronus to guard the locket Horcrux in the Deathly Hallows, it is important to note that her Patronus survives only because she is unaware of the Horcrux's true nature. Her belief in her righteousness sustains the illusion. Were she more self-aware, perhaps even she would fail. The irony is rich. The Dark Lord himself, the greatest dark wizard of all time, had no Patronus. There is no record of Voldemort ever attempting to produce one. And why would he? His magic was rooted in conquest, not protection. His soul, torn by the making of Horcruxes, was incapable of the harmony required for such magic. The Patronus would have rejected him, just as a phoenix rejected his wand. Number 18. Why didn't Voldemort forgive failure? Voldemort never tolerated failure. His wrath was swift, cruel, and without appeal. Among the Death Eaters there was no such thing as a second chance. A single mistake could mean torture, exile, or worse. But why? Why was the Dark Lord so obsessed with perfection, so allergic to the very idea of human error? The answer lies in the very core of who Tom Riddle became. A tyrant born of fear, sustained by control, and addicted to dominance. Take the case of Lucius Malfoy. Once a favourite of the Dark Lord, Lucius held status, wealth, and Voldemort's ear. But everything changed after the fiasco at the Department of Mysteries. Voldemort had tasked Lucius with obtaining the prophecy concerning Harry Potter and himself, information the Dark Lord believed essential for victory. But Lucius failed. Not only did he fail, but he also allowed the prophecy sphere to be destroyed. "You should have killed him on sight," Voldemort later spat, as described in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. From that day forward, Lucius was marked not only by his master's disappointment, but by his public humiliation. Voldemort didn't need to say it aloud. Lucius was no longer trusted. He had become an example, a warning. This was Voldemort's tactic: rule through fear, not through loyalty. It was not enough for his followers to obey. They had to tremble. He believed that fear ensured efficiency. That fear crushed doubt. That fear made betrayal unthinkable. There is no good and evil, there is only power, and those too weak to seek it, he once told Harry in The Philosopher's Stone. In Voldemort's worldview, mercy equated to weakness. Forgiveness was the language of lesser men. He could not afford it, not because his enemies were strong, but because he feared the fragility of his own empire. Bellatrix Lestrange understood this dynamic better than anyone. Her unwavering devotion came not just from admiration, but from fear mixed with obsession. She never failed him, and when others did, she was the first to demand their punishment. After the Department of Mysteries, Bellatrix pleaded for Voldemort to punish Lucius. Not out of loyalty to Voldemort, but out of her desire to secure her position. She had seen what happened to those who disappointed the Dark Lord. Bellatrix thrived in that brutal world, but even she was not immune to his judgment. When she failed to kill Ginny Weasley during the Battle of Hogwarts, Voldemort didn't reprimand her. He simply withdrew his trust, refocusing his attention elsewhere. For Voldemort, silence could be as lethal as the Cruciatus Curse. Voldemort's punishments were not just personal, they were theatrical. He wanted his followers to witness what happened when someone failed him. When Avery grovelled before him in the Goblet of Fire, begging for forgiveness after claiming false intelligence, Voldemort struck him down with the Cruciatus Curse, not because he was particularly enraged, but because he needed everyone else to see it. "You ask for forgiveness?" Voldemort said coldly. "I do not forgive. I do not forget." That line echoed in the cold chamber, searing itself into the minds of the gathered Death Eaters. Even those who were once closest to him could not escape his wrath. Severus Snape, though a double agent, walked a dangerous line for years. Voldemort trusted Snape more than most, but not absolutely. And Snape knew that one misstep, one hint of disloyalty, would be his end. That is why Snape worked with such precision, such icy detachment. He could not afford error. He played the most dangerous game in all of Wizarding Britain, and Voldemort's disdain for failure was the shadow that haunted his every move. But Voldemort's obsession with control and punishment had deeper roots. As a child in the orphanage, Tom Riddle had learned that weakness led to ridicule, that to show mercy was to expose vulnerability. He grew up believing that dominance was the only way to command respect. When he tortured other children or manipulated them into doing his will, it was not for sport, it was a rehearsal, a training ground. And as he built his empire, he carried those same lessons forward. Perhaps the most chilling example of Voldemort's intolerance came when he punished the entire family of a Death Eater. When Regulus Black dared to defy him by attempting to destroy a Horcrux, Voldemort didn't stop with Regulus. He cursed the house-elf creature, he haunted the Black family's legacy, and he made sure no one would ever forget what disobedience looked like. Voldemort didn't need to find Regulus's body. He only needed others to believe that betrayal was a death sentence. This absolute zero-tolerance policy created a climate of paranoia among the Death Eaters. They spied on each other. They reported each other's failures. They lied, not just to Voldemort, but to one another. Trust disintegrated. And while this may have seemed like a brilliant method of control, it also planted the seeds of Voldemort's downfall. Fear, after all, is a brittle glue. When things began to collapse, no one fought harder to protect Voldemort because no one truly loved him. Peter Pettigrew, the cowardly traitor who delivered the Potters into Voldemort's hands, eventually became a symbol of this broken system. After helping his master return in the Goblet of Fire, Wormtail expected reward. What he received instead was a magical hand, a gift that doubled as a leash. Voldemort told him, "May your loyalty never waver again." But Voldemort had no intention of ever trusting him. The silver hand, beautiful and deadly, was designed to kill Peter if he ever hesitated again, which it did. When Peter faltered in the Deathly Hallows, hesitating to kill Harry, in the cellar of Malfoy Manor, the hand strangled him. His own master had pre-programmed his death. This wasn't just punishment, it was preemptive execution. Voldemort didn't wait for mistakes, he anticipated them, and he created mechanisms to ensure he never had to forgive, because the traitor would already be dead. Number 19. What happened to the Death Eaters after Voldemort's fall? After Voldemort's final scream echoed through the shattered walls of Hogwarts, a heavy silence fell across the battlefield. It was not just the silence of a war ended, but the eerie calm before the reckoning began. The Death Eaters, once proud, fanatical servants of the Dark Lord, were now scattered, bloodied, broken, and hunted. Some had perished during the last charge, their loyalty costing them their lives. Others had fled when the tide turned, their black robes trailing behind them like shadows, trying to escape the dawn. The Ministry of Magic, now under the determined leadership of Kingsley Shacklebolt, wasted no time. "We will not rest until justice is served," he declared on the first day of peace. The Auror office was rebuilt, strengthened, and armed with new authority. Many feared a return to the oppressive tactics of the past, but the ministry walked a delicate line, merciless to those who clung to Voldemort's ideology, yet merciful to those who could prove redemption or ignorance. Lucius Malfoy was among the first to surrender. His pale, trembling hands held no wand as he arrived at the ministry gates with Narcissa and Draco in tow. His former grandeur was gone. The once imposing man was now reduced to a desperate father. During the battle, Narcissa had lied to Voldemort, claiming Harry Potter was dead, an act that helped turn the tide. This, and their defection at the final moment, spared the Malfoys from Azkaban. Yet they were never truly forgiven. As Ron Weasley once said bitterly, they didn't change sides, they just realized theirs was losing. Not all were as fortunate. Bellatrix Lestrange had died at the hands of Molly Weasley, her laughter silenced by a mother's fury. But others, like Antonin Dolohov and Thorfinn Rule, were captured in the days following the battle. Dolohov resisted arrest, cursing 3 Aurors before being stunned by Kingsley himself. "He had murder in his eyes," said Kingsley. "He would have kept killing if we hadn't stopped him." The trials were swift. The Wizengamot operated day and night, listening to testimonies from survivors and examining pensive memories. Those found guilty were sent to Azkaban. The fortress was no longer under Dementor control. Kingsley had abolished their use, but the prison remained grim. "We will not answer cruelty with cruelty," he said, "but we will not forget what was done." Not all Death Eaters went quietly. A group calling itself the Remnant emerged in the months after Voldemort's death. Led by a little-known follower named Corbin Yaxley, they believed the Dark Lord's spirit would rise again. They began gathering magical relics, including a piece of Nagini's preserved scale, convinced it held part of Voldemort's essence. Their hideout was discovered in a ruined manor in Wales, where a duel with auras ended in flames and ruin. Yaxley was killed, and his followers imprisoned, but the rumours never stopped. "Some of them disappeared completely," said Hermione Granger in an interview with the Daily Prophet. "We believe a few fled abroad, Durmstrang territory perhaps, somewhere they could keep their beliefs alive, even in the shadows." She had worked tirelessly to identify fugitive Death Eaters, using both magical means and diplomatic channels. Her efforts uncovered pockets of sympathizers hiding in Bulgaria, Romania, and parts of Scandinavia. Then there were those who claimed they had been under the Imperious curse. Every trial featured at least one accused who wept before the court, insisting they had no control. Some told convincing stories. One ministry worker, terrified and shaking, explained how Travers had cursed him and forced him to report on his co-workers. Others were less credible. "The curse has become a cloak," noted one witch in the courtroom. "They wear it to hide what they truly did." The younger generation of Death Eaters, those like Draco Malfoy, Theodore Nott, and Vincent Crabbe, faced a different judgment. Crabbe had died in the Room of Requirement, consumed by the very fiendfire he had unleashed. Nott, who had kept a low profile during the war, was placed under surveillance. Draco was watched closely, but not arrested. "He was a boy trying to be a man in a world gone mad," Harry Potter once said. "He was cruel, but he didn't kill." It was one of the few times Harry defended a former enemy, and it left many surprised. But justice wasn't always clean. In Knockturn Alley, whispers told of bounty hunters, unsanctioned witches and wizards who tracked down fleeing Death Eaters for gold. One such figure, calling himself the Hound, was rumoured to have killed 3 fugitives before disappearing. Some saw him as a hero, others as a murderer. The ministry denied involvement, but many turned a blind eye. Not every Death Eater believed in Voldemort's cause. Some had joined out of fear. One such man was Reginald Avery, whose father had served in the First War. "They would have killed my family," he said during his trial. "I had no choice." But choice, as Dumbledore once told Harry, was the measure of a man. Avery was found guilty, but his sentence was reduced. He now works in a minor department of the ministry under strict probation. Fenrir Greyback, the sadistic werewolf who had fought alongside the Death Eaters, proved harder to capture. For nearly a year, he haunted the forests of Europe, attacking isolated villages. When he was finally cornered in the Ardennes, it took 5 auras to subdue him. He was not taken to Azkaban, but to a secure magical facility designed to hold creatures of his kind. "He was no Death Eater," said Hermione. "He was a monster they let off the leash." Other former followers tried to reinvent themselves. Selwyn opened a potion shop under a false name in France. When discovered, he fled, leaving behind a trail of cursed ingredients. Mulciber was never found, though some say he lives among muggles, hiding his magical signature and posing as a mute gardener. "I saw him," claimed a young witch in 2006. "He was in Devon. He looked at me like he knew I'd recognized him." There were tragedies too. The family of Augustus Rookwood was attacked by vigilantes who believed they were protecting him. His daughter, who had not been involved in the war, was killed. It sparked a public outcry. "We cannot become what we fought against," wrote Luna Lovegood in The Quibbler. hatred will only plant the seeds of the next war. Yet some felt that justice had not gone far enough. The families of those murdered during the war, the Bones, the Diggories, the Lovegoods, wanted answers. "Who gave the order to attack the Lovegoods' house?" Xenophilius demanded in a rare public speech. "Who decided my wife's life was worth nothing?" The names, he believed, were still out there, hidden in shadows, protected by lies. There were whispers of dark magic being found in abandoned Death Eater homes, blood rituals half-finished, strange books that whispered in the night, and enchanted portraits of Voldemort that still spoke in riddles. One such portrait, found in the Lestrange vault, reportedly said, "You cannot kill an idea." It was burned, but the words were remembered. As the years passed, fewer Death Eaters remained. Some died in prison, others aged into obscurity. But their legacy lingered. Every child who entered Hogwarts walked past the repaired walls of the Great Hall and knew the story. Teachers reminded them of the price of hatred, and once a year, on the anniversary of the Battle of Hogwarts, names were read aloud, both heroes and villains. It was not to glorify, but to remember. "There is no forgetting," said Neville Longbottom, now a professor. "Only learning, and the only way forward is to ensure it never happens again." Still in the corners of the magical world, fear persisted. Some believed a new generation of dark wizards would rise, not under Voldemort's name, but under a new banner. They would not wear masks or mark their arms. They would be subtler, quieter, more dangerous. "Evil evolves," Kingsley once said. "It wears new faces, but its heart is the same." And so the hunt never truly ended. The Death Eaters were scattered, imprisoned, or dead, but the questions they left behind, the broken families, the shattered trust, the taste of terror, remained. The war was over, but its echoes still walked the world. Number 20. Why did Voldemort assign Draco Malfoy such a crucial task? When Lord Voldemort handed Draco Malfoy the task of assassinating Albus Dumbledore, it sent ripples of confusion through even the most devoted followers of the Dark Lord. A 16-year-old boy, pampered, prideful, and thoroughly unprepared for the brutalities of true darkness, was entrusted with a mission of such magnitude that failure was nearly guaranteed. But Voldemort was never one to make decisions without a deeper, often crueler purpose in mind. Draco Malfoy had grown up in luxury and power, a child of the elite, nurtured by the belief in blood supremacy and his father's favor within Voldemort's circle. Lucius Malfoy had long enjoyed a high standing in the ranks of the Death Eaters until he failed. The fiasco at the Department of Mysteries during the events of Order of the Phoenix had exposed Lucius's incompetence. Not only was the prophecy lost, but several Death Eaters were captured. Voldemort had suffered humiliation, and in his world, failures never went unpunished. It was not merely punishment that Voldemort sought, it was retribution laced with symbolism. Draco, the heir to the Malfoy line, would be forced to carry the weight of his father's failure. By handing him an impossible task, killing the only wizard Voldemort had ever feared, Voldemort tightened his grip on the Malfoys like a serpent coiling around its prey. As Bellatrix Lestrange ominously reminded Narcissa in Half-Blood Prince, the Dark Lord does not require assistance, he requires only obedience. Draco was no murderer. Beneath his sneer and arrogance, he was still a schoolboy. Yet that was precisely the point. Voldemort knew that giving him this task was a sentence, not a challenge. The hallway leading to Dumbledore's demise would not be lit by ambition, but shadowed by despair. It was a long, cruel game designed not to empower Draco, but to break him, and through him break his parents. Throughout Half-Blood Prince, we see Draco deteriorate. His swagger begins to fade. His face grows pale and thin, eyes sunken with the weight of a task he neither asked for nor knew how to complete. "My father's in prison," Draco mutters once to Borgin of Borgin and Berks, fear lacing his voice. "He didn't fail. He didn't!" But his trembling hands betray his words. The guilt and desperation consume him. The assignment becomes not just a punishment for Lucius, but a trial of Narcissa's loyalty. Voldemort doesn't trust anyone, not even those who once kneeled at his side. Narcissa, desperate to protect her only child, turns to Severus Snape in a moment of vulnerability. Their encounter in the dark drawing room leads to the unbreakable vow. "Will you, Severus, look after him if he seems to be failing?" she pleads. It's not Draco's success she fears, it's his death, and Voldemort knew she would. This was a test wrapped in torment. Voldemort's mind was a chessboard of cruelty. Draco was the pawn, but a pawn designed to send a message to every other Death Eater. You are all replaceable. You are all punishable. Your children are not beyond my reach. The message was clear. Serve me without flaw, or your bloodline will pay the price. Even Bellatrix, loyal and fanatical, watched her sister crumble. That was no accident. Voldemort thrived on fear, and few things inspire more fear than watching your child put to slaughter for your sins. But Voldemort did not expect Draco to succeed. That was never the goal. Snape, the double agent, was always Plan B, arguably Plan A in disguise. Dumbledore understood this. As he later explained to Harry, Voldemort's plan, I believe, was to have Draco fail so that he could have another excuse to kill him, or his parents. It was a layered trap, where even success would be suicide. Inside the castle, Draco's attempts to repair the vanishing cabinet, his chosen method to smuggle Death Eaters into Hogwarts, become a symbol of his slow unraveling. Day after day, alone in the room of requirement, he tinkers and broods, burdened not by dark passion, but by paralyzing fear. When Katie Bell is cursed and nearly dies from a necklace meant for Dumbledore, it is not triumph that fills Draco, it is terror. He begins to cry in bathrooms, tries to mask his emotions behind cruel words and desperate acts. It was on one of those days, hunched over the sink with tears on his face, that Harry finds him. A duel erupts and Draco is nearly killed by a spell Harry doesn't fully understand, Sectum Sempra. It slices Draco open, blood everywhere. Snape saves him, but Voldemort's cruelty is made visible. A child ordered to commit murder is nearly murdered himself. No celebration, no progress, only more fear. Voldemort had created a monster out of fear, not power. The final confrontation on the Astronomy Tower is where the tragedy reaches its peak. Dumbledore, weakened and leaning against the parapet, looks at Draco not as a threat, but as a child on the edge of collapse. "You are not a killer, Draco," he says, softly. "You are no assassin." The boy trembles, wand shaking, and behind him, Death Eaters emerge like shadows. But Draco cannot do it. He lowers his wand. The choice, in the end, is not between good and evil, but between murder and mercy. It is Snape who finishes what Draco cannot. With a flash of green, Dumbledore falls and the world changes forever. But it is telling that Voldemort did not witness this moment. He sent Draco to murder, knowing he would fail, hoping it would twist him into something Voldemort could mold or discard. Draco became a cautionary tale in real time. Narcissa's plea to Snape shows another layer of Voldemort's mistake. He underestimated love. He believed fear could surpass it. But the Malfoys, broken and disgraced, still loved their son. And later, in Deathly Hallows, it is Narcissa who lies to Voldemort when she checks Harry's pulse. Why? Because Harry is alive, and so is Draco. That single motherly act, born of love, would eventually cost Voldemort everything. There was irony in Voldemort's punishment. By trying to punish Lucius through Draco, he lost control over them. The Malfoys no longer served him with devotion. They obeyed out of fear, but their hearts were elsewhere. In Deathly Hallows, they abandoned the battlefield, stepping away as Voldemort falls. They had lost too much. Voldemort's lesson had backfired. He taught them fear, but also taught them the cost of loyalty. Bellatrix noticed this change. Her fanaticism deepened as the Malfoys wavered. She sought to prove herself in their place. But even she, who once mocked her sister's softness, would later scream in anguish as Molly Weasley cut her down. The family Voldemort tried to use as an example fractured under the pressure, and their story became one of survival, not allegiance. Voldemort's decision also cast a dark shadow over Hogwarts. Students whispered of the boy who had turned dark. Some feared Draco, others pitied him, but none understood the torment he endured. His actions rippled across the school, drawing a darker curtain over the final year. The boy who once strutted with pride now walked in silence. Voldemort had killed something in him, even if it wasn't his life. The story of Draco and the assassination plot is not one of glory, but of despair. Voldemort weaponized a child's fear, a mother's love, and a family's disgrace to make a statement. And yet, in doing so, he revealed his greatest weakness. He believed control was everything. He believed fear would bind forever. But in trying to forge Draco into a killer, he shattered his own illusion of loyalty. The tragedy of Draco is that he was never meant to win. Voldemort played with his life like a predator, toying with a wounded creature. "He's just a boy," Dumbledore whispered moments before his death. And he was right. In the end, Draco was still just a boy, forced to wear the mask of a man far too soon. It is perhaps one of the darkest parts of the series. Not the battles, not the deaths, but the slow erosion of innocence under the weight of another man's cruelty. Voldemort's choice wasn't a gamble, it was a calculated torment. Draco's pain was the message, his failure the instrument, and Voldemort, as always, played his music in a minor key, never hearing the discord in his own design. But that discord would cost him. The boy he tried to break did not become his weapon. The family he tried to punish would abandon him, and the world he tried to dominate would one day stand united against him, not with hatred, but with something he never understood, compassion. In the end, the greatest weapon Voldemort unleashed wasn't a curse, but a boy too scared to follow through. And in that failure, the first cracks in his empire began to show. Number 21. Did Death Eaters have access to forbidden magic? The first time Harry Potter heard the words unforgivable curses, he was in a dark Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom at Hogwarts. Moody, or rather Barty Crouch Jr. disguised as Moody, demonstrated them one by one. The entire room watched in horror as he sent a spider writhing in pain, forced it to dance against its will, and finally snuffed out its life with a whisper, Avada Kedavra. That lesson was not only a warning, but a glimpse into the toolbox of the Death Eaters, and yes, without a doubt, that toolbox included spells and rituals most witches and wizards never dared to study, let alone use. The Death Eaters were not merely brutes following a tyrant. They were students, devotees, of a specific kind of knowledge. Forbidden magic, by its very nature, is elusive, hidden, layered with consequences. But the Death Eaters embraced it, delighted in its secrecy and its power. The 3 unforgivable curses were merely the surface. Behind them was a web of arcane studies, rituals older than the Ministry itself, magics buried deep in dusty tomes that hadn't seen daylight in centuries. Voldemort, their master, was the architect of this darkness. He was known for his obsession with immortality, but fewer know that his pursuits began with obscure branches of dark alchemy. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore tells Harry he showed a fascination with the most evil of objects, or with Horcruxes. Creating a Horcrux requires murder, not just a killing curse, but a ritual act that tears the soul. Even most Death Eaters never dared it. But Voldemort performed it not once, but 7 times. This was not casual darkness. It was precision-crafted evil, rooted in long-lost magical theory. But Voldemort did not work alone. His closest lieutenants delved into forbidden knowledge as fervently as he did. Take Antonin Dolohov, for example, a brutal figure, but not a mere thug. He developed his own variant of a powerful, silent curse, one he used to devastating effect in the Department of Mysteries. Hermione, brilliant as she was, nearly died from it. The curse sliced through her with invisible force, bypassing shields. It was a spell so dark that even the Aurors didn't recognize it immediately. Dolohov's spell wasn't taught at Durmstrang or Beauxbaton. It was crafted, likely from fragments of ancient magical texts. Perhaps it was once used in the Goblin rebellions, or learned from cursed grimoires stored in Nocturne Alley. Wherever it came from, Dolohov had taken magic into his own hands and twisted it into a weapon the world had forgotten how to defend against. Then there was Bellatrix Lestrange. Her madness concealed brilliance. Not only was she a prodigy in the unforgivable curses, especially Cruciatus, but she was whispered to practice ritual magic that involved blood and agony. In Order of the Phoenix, she tells Harry, "You need to mean it, Potter. You need to really want to cause pain to enjoy it." She was speaking from experience, not theory. Bellatrix didn't just cast curses, she drew strength from them. Rumors, never confirmed but widely feared, spoke of her carving sigils into her skin during rituals, channeling pain into power. There were those who believed she had inherited this from her mother's side, the Black family, an ancient house whose attic reportedly held books bound in human hide, and whose ancestors dabbled in animating dead bone and blood. These were not tales for children. They were the kinds of stories whispered among unspeakables and banned by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. In fact, the department had an entire division tasked with confiscating such texts and artifacts. One such object was a mirror once owned by Lucius Malfoy, an obsidian hand mirror that could show not your reflection, but your truest fear. It had been banned in 1739 after 2 ministers were driven mad by it. And yet Lucius kept it in his drawing room, casually brushing dust from it while discussing ministry policy. The line between power and madness was something the Death Eaters enjoyed walking. Another form of forbidden magic used by Death Eaters was necromancy, not in the childish sense of raising skeletons from graves, but the far darker art of communicating with the spirits of the unwilling dead. Some said this was how Voldemort confirmed loyalty from his followers, by forcing them to speak with loved ones they had lost, hearing the pain in their voices as a test of their resolve. Whether or not these stories were true, they revealed the mindset of a group who saw death as a tool, not a boundary. Even Snape, whose loyalties were ever-shifting, had knowledge of forbidden magic beyond the reach of most. His spellbook, which Harry inherited, contained spells like Sectum Sempra, a slicing curse with no incantation, a gesture of the wand and a whispered word that left flesh torn as if by an invisible blade. This was not schoolyard dueling magic, it was battlefield sorcery, and Snape had invented it as a student. But perhaps the clearest example of forbidden transformation magic was Peter Pettigrew. In Goblet of Fire, he regrew Voldemort's body using a ritual involving the bone of the father, the flesh of the servant, and the blood of the enemy. The transformation was horrifying both in its ingredients and its result. This magic was never taught, even at Durmstrang. It was stitched together from ancient practices from times when wizards sacrificed kin to summon gods. What made the Death Eaters truly terrifying wasn't just that they had access to forbidden magic, but that they used it with precision. They weren't chaotic beasts. They were scholars of the grotesque. Rodolphus and Rabastan Lestrange were known to have experimented with magical poisons that mimicked dragon venom. These weren't brewed in cauldrons. They were distilled in blood rooms beneath old manor homes, whispered into flasks by candlelight. Some say they even used time magic. One aura, Kingsley Shacklebolt once mentioned in hushed tones, that Death Eaters in Albania had experimented with stalling time within small areas, creating loops that trapped enemies in never-ending seconds. The Ministry banned time turners after the Battle of the Department of Mysteries. But what if the Death Eaters had already built their own? Even the dark marks on their arms were an act of forbidden symbology. The skull with the snake wasn't just a brand, it was a link, a tether to Voldemort himself. It could summon them across great distances, burn as a signal, and perhaps more. Some theorized the marks also bound their lives to his, forming a kind of collective enchantment. When he died, so did their power. The mark faded. What sort of magic did it take to connect that many souls to a single will? Yaxley, a Death Eater, who infiltrated the Ministry, was believed to be a master of magical espionage. He enchanted documents to alter themselves after delivery, used glamour spells that could deceive even enchanted mirrors. This went beyond polyjuice. It was illusion magic on a level most auras weren't trained to counter. He made bureaucracy a battlefield, and he knew how to win. The Carrows, Amicus, and Alecto brought forbidden magic into Hogwarts itself. They taught students how to cast Cruciatus on each other. They didn't just wield dark magic, they normalized it. They made darkness part of the curriculum. This was a deeper, more dangerous kind of evil, the kind that teaches others to believe pain is a lesson. Even the giants and werewolves aligned with the Death Eaters were bound not by loyalty alone, but by dark contracts. Fenrir Greyback, the infamous werewolf, was believed to have been enhanced by rituals that increased his strength and savagery. When he attacked, it wasn't just hunger, it was calculated horror. He targeted children, turned the fear of transformation into a weapon. And in the end, this is what set the Death Eaters apart. While most wizards feared the unknown, they studied it. While the Ministry locked away dark knowledge, they made it their doctrine. Not all Death Eaters were geniuses, but the core group, those closest to Voldemort, were among the most dangerously educated wizards alive. Forbidden magic is forbidden for a reason. It corrupts. It stains the soul. But the Death Eaters welcomed that stain. It became a badge of honor. And even in their downfall, the whispers of their power linger. Somewhere, deep in the restricted sections of ruined libraries and cursed manors, their grimoires remain. Waiting. Number 22. Why did some Death Eaters return to Voldemort despite fear? When Voldemort returned, not everyone ran in fear. Not everyone hid, trembling at the thought of serving again. Some came back willingly, eyes shining, hearts racing. For them, the Dark Lord's return was not a threat, but a calling. They did not need to be forced. They were waiting. The world saw them as cowards, as slaves to evil. But many Death Eaters walked back into the fire, not out of fear, but out of belief. Bellatrix Lestrange never needed persuasion. Her loyalty ran through her veins like venom. Even in Azkaban she did not flinch. "The Dark Lord will rise again, Crouch!" she screamed during her trial. "Throw us into Azkaban, we will wait!" and she did. For 13 long years she sat in that icy fortress, not regretting, not weeping. She waited with pride. Her return was not because she feared punishment. She feared nothing but a world without Voldemort. To her, he was not just a leader, he was a god. For Lucius Malfoy, things were more complicated. After Voldemort's fall, he slid into high society with polished ease, pretending he had been Imperiist, claiming he had no choice. But his pride was wounded. His name, once feared and respected, became a shadow of itself. The grandeur of Malfoy Manor became a golden cage, and Lucius could not bear the taste of humiliation. When Voldemort rose again, it wasn't fear that brought him crawling back. It was the hunger for redemption. He needed to be someone again. Narcissa Malfoy, though never officially a Death Eater, understood this unspoken need. She saw how Lucius changed. The stiffness in his jaw, the bitterness in his silences. He needed Voldemort to rise not only for ideology, but for identity. Without the Dark Lord, many of them were lost men. Men of ambition, of status, reduced to living ghosts in a world that rejected their past. Returning meant recovering honor, even if it came dressed in blood. There was an allure in the ideology itself, the belief in purity, in power, in dominance. The likes of Antonin Dolohov and Thorfinn Ruhl weren't merely soldiers, they were believers. Dolohov, who had tortured countless Muggleborns during the First Wizarding War, held on to a vision, a world where magic ruled without apology. After Voldemort fell, Dolohov vanished into the underground, but never gave up hope. "He will come back," he told another fugitive, "magic that's strong never dies." When the dark mark burned again, Dolohov didn't hesitate. He returned like a disciple called back to his temple. The dark mark was more than just a brand. It pulsed with something ancient, something alive. Severus Snape once described it as growing clearer, stronger, as Voldemort regained power. For many Death Eaters it was like hearing a voice in their bones, a low call like thunder beneath the skin. Some claimed they could feel his emotions, his rage, his triumph. It was not just fear that summoned them, it was connection, a dark thread tying them to their master. There were whispers among the older Death Eaters that the mark was more than magical. "He put a piece of himself in all of us," said Travers in a drunken rant after the Second War. He meant it metaphorically, perhaps, or maybe not. Some claimed to see him in dreams, others heard his voice even when he was gone. This mystical bond became a chain, yes, but also a beacon. It called them home. Even among the younger generation, there were those who came to Voldemort not by threat, but by belief. Draco Malfoy, just a boy, stepped into the role reluctantly at first. But there was pride, too, the honor of his family, the need to prove himself. "I'm not afraid," he snapped at Snape. He wanted to believe it. Fear was there, yes. But so was purpose. So was legacy. The Carrow siblings, Alecto and Amicus, embraced the ideology with sickening joy. After Voldemort's return, they became the enforcers of the new Hogwarts. They taught hate like a sacred scripture. Torture was no longer punishment. It was doctrine. They had no need to be forced. They returned because the world Voldemort promised was the world they wanted. The idea of ruling by terror thrilled them. They believed in it. Not all returns were triumphant. Peter Pettigrew, Wormtail, crawled back in shame. For him it was fear, survival, and a craving for approval. But even he, with trembling hands, spoke of the Dark Lord with awe. He is the most powerful wizard," he stuttered to Snape. Pettigrew's return was a confession, a need to belong to something greater, even if it crushed him. He feared Voldemort, yes, but he also worshipped him. There was power in Voldemort's presence. He spoke, and the world seemed to hush. "There is no good and evil, there is only power, and those too weak to seek it," he once told Harry in the Chamber of Secrets. That belief echoed through the ranks of his followers. They came back because he made them feel powerful. He made them feel chosen. For those who had lived in the shadows for too long, that feeling was addictive. Some Death Eaters returned out of revenge. Mulciber had lost everything when Voldemort fell. His name was blackened, his fortune stripped. The Ministry had taken his wand. When Voldemort returned, Mulciber saw a chance not just to serve, but to punish. He wanted the world to suffer the way he had suffered. His loyalty was forged in fire and hate. Others, like Rookwood, were spies who had once worked inside the Ministry. For them, the return was practical. The old connections, the old power games, it all came back. Rookwood had never been flashy. He was a man of secrets. Serving Voldemort again meant whispering in the right ears, pulling strings in the dark. It wasn't about fear, it was about relevance. Voldemort's promise was seductive, a new order, a purified world. For many who had been marginalized, especially the pure-blood elite watching Muggleborns rise through the Ministry, it was a vision of restoration. "They think blood doesn't matter," said Yaxley during a meeting, "but it does. It always has." These men and women believed they were preserving something ancient. Returning to Voldemort was not surrender. It was resistance. Even after the battle of the Department of Mysteries, where many were captured and imprisoned, some of the captured Death Eaters still held on to belief. "You should be honored, Potter," said Bellatrix. "He chose you to die by his hand." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with reverence. It was as if Voldemort's touch had sanctified her. She saw death for him as a gift. The fear, when it existed, was not always of Voldemort himself, but of life without him. Without his power, many of these wizards had nothing, no path, no glory, no purpose. The world after Voldemort's fall was grey. He had promised them colour, thunder, legacy. So they came back, because no matter the risk, the thought of fading away into obscurity was worse. For some, it was guilt that brought them back. Regulus Black, years before the Second War, had already begun to doubt. But by then, he had already gone too far. "I know I will die," he wrote in a letter before stealing Voldemort's Horcrux. His return was secret, suicidal. But it was still a return. Even those who broke away felt the pull. The mark never fully fades. Perhaps that was Voldemort's greatest magic. Not just the spells, the curses, the terror, but the belief he inspired. He turned followers into zealots, into martyrs, into worshippers. When he spoke, he didn't just command, he ignited. The fire he lit in their hearts did not die easily, even when faced with death. Some believed he could not be killed, that he was more than mortal. After all, who else had defied death again and again? "He is not a man!" cried Bellatrix in rage. "He is more than a man!" To them he was myth, he was eternal. To return to him was to return to something larger than life, to be part of a destiny, a prophecy, a war that mattered. In the end, they did not come back merely because they were afraid. Fear might push a man to kneel, but belief makes him fight. The Death Eaters who returned to Voldemort did so, not with trembling hands, but with open arms. Some were cowards, yes, some were cruel, but many believed, and that is what made them dangerous. Number 23. Why didn't Voldemort trust even his most loyal followers? Voldemort's cold eyes swept the room like a storm cloud about to break. The Death Eaters knelt in silence, their masked faces turned downward, yet their minds roared with a single shared fear. What if he suspects me? No one spoke. No one dared. Even Bellatrix Lestrange, who worshipped him with a fervour bordering on madness, kept her eyes low, trembling like a devout disciple in the presence of a wrathful god. And Voldemort liked it that way. He preferred silence over praise, submission over devotion. Because trust, real, human trust, was foreign to him. He had no use for it. He had learned early that trust was weakness. Born as Tom Riddle in the dank halls of Wool's orphanage, he understood one thing. People leave, people lie, people hurt. The matrons at the orphanage were cold, distant, and transactional. The other children were cruel or indifferent. Even as a boy, Tom could sense the duplicity around him. "There's something not right about that boy," one caretaker had whispered once, not knowing he could hear her. And she was right. There was something not right, but it wasn't the magic, it was the soul. The seeds of Voldemort's mistrust were sown not in his adult years, but in those dark, lonely nights in the orphanage when he hoarded his treasures, punished those who crossed him, and learned to rely on no one but himself. Dumbledore, who visited him at 11, noted this absence of affection. "You're not the first to discover you can do things, Tom. You're not the only one." But Tom didn't believe that. He wanted to be the only one. Trust meant equality, and he was never anyone's equal. He was superior, or he was nothing. As he rose to power and became Voldemort, he crafted a hierarchy where loyalty was demanded but never returned. He selected his Death Eaters with the precision of a surgeon, looking for cruelty, cunning, ambition, but even then he never believed in their loyalty, only their usefulness. Take Lucius Malfoy, for example. Elegant, poised, and wealthy, Lucius was one of Voldemort's favoured servants in the First War. But when Voldemort fell, Lucius claimed he'd been under the Imperius curse, abandoning his master like a coward. Voldemort never forgot. Upon his return, he punished Lucius not with death, but something far crueler, by replacing him. "You lost me, my servant Lucius," Voldemort hissed when Harry escaped from the Department of Mysteries, referring to the prophecy. He stripped Lucius of power, status, and pride. Trust had never been part of the deal. Even Bellatrix, the most fanatically devoted of his followers, was not immune to his scrutiny. Her loyalty bordered on obsession. She would have died for him, and nearly did countless times. Yet Voldemort saw her not as a partner or ally, but as a tool. A dangerous, powerful tool, yes, but one that could be cast aside. During the battle of the Department of Mysteries, Bellatrix pleaded with Voldemort. "The boy! He's in the Department of Mysteries!" She was desperate to prove herself, but when she failed to retrieve the prophecy, Voldemort showed no gratitude for her efforts. Instead, he punished her with silence and scorn. Love meant nothing to him, not even her unholy version of it. Then there was Severus Snape. Of all the Death Eaters, Snape was perhaps the most enigmatic. A double agent whose true loyalties remained a mystery until the final moments of his life. Snape was valued by Voldemort not because he was trusted, but because he was clever. Voldemort appreciated cleverness. He needed it, but he never truly believed Snape's loyalty. He exploited it. "You are a talented liar, Snape," Voldemort once said, smiling in a way that chilled the blood. "You always have been." Even when Snape offered to watch over Hogwarts in Voldemort's name, the Dark Lord doubted him. Why else would he entrust Nagini, his last Horcrux, to guard the boy when he sent Snape to fetch the Elder Wand? Snape's death was the ultimate proof. Voldemort slit his throat not because he believed Snape had betrayed him, but because he thought Snape had become useless. The wand wasn't working, and Voldemort, driven by paranoia, assumed Snape had somehow claimed its loyalty. The thought that someone might usurp his power, even unintentionally, was intolerable. "You have been a good and faithful servant, Severus," Voldemort lied before murdering him. Trust had never been part of their relationship, only utility. Voldemort's inability to trust was not just emotional, it was strategic. He believed that true control could only be achieved through fear. "There is no good and evil," he told Harry. "There is only power and those too weak to seek it." Power for him meant domination, not cooperation. His Death Eaters were not comrades, they were pawns. And pawns, by design, are expendable. The Carrows, Alecto, and Amicus served him in the final year of the war by terrorizing students at Hogwarts. They were cruel, vicious, and fanatically obedient. But Voldemort never once spoke to them directly in the books. They weren't worth his attention. They weren't trusted. They were feared into compliance. Their failure to maintain order at Hogwarts didn't earn them retribution from Voldemort, only neglect. They weren't significant enough to be punished. They were simply forgotten. Barty Crouch Jr., on the other hand, offered a fascinating study. This was a man who had sacrificed everything, his freedom, his identity, his sanity, to serve Voldemort. Disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, he infiltrated Hogwarts, engineered Harry's entry into the Triwizard Tournament, and ensured his master's resurrection. And what was his reward? A kiss from a Dementor. Voldemort didn't even try to rescue him, didn't even mention him again. The most loyal follower of all was erased from existence. Why? Because even absolute loyalty did not earn trust. If anything, it provoked suspicion. What motivates such blind devotion, Voldemort might have asked himself? What hidden agendas hide behind that fanatical mask? Even Peter Pettigrew, Wormtail, was used and discarded. Peter had betrayed his friends, lived in hiding for 13 years, and sacrificed a hand to help Voldemort return. And Voldemort, in turn, gave him a silver hand, a gift laced with poison. "You have been very useful, Peter," Voldemort said with a cruel smile. But when Peter hesitated for a moment, conflicted between mercy and duty, the hand turned on him and killed him. It was never a gift. It was a leash. Throughout the series, Voldemort's behavior toward his followers is consistent. He isolates them, pits them against each other, and ensures they are never quite sure of their standing. This is not trust. This is domination through uncertainty, and he thrives on it. During the meeting at Malfoy Manor, where he takes Lucius's wand and mocks him in front of his family, Voldemort is performing a ritual of humiliation. Narcissa dares not speak. Draco looks petrified. This is not a family of allies, it's a household of hostages. Contrast this with Dumbledore's approach. Albus Dumbledore trusted his allies even when they faltered. He trusted Snape despite his past. He trusted Harry even when it cost him his life. And that trust created loyalty, rooted in love, not fear. Voldemort could never understand this. He mocked it. "The old fool," he called Dumbledore. He thought love could protect you. But in the end, love did protect Harry. It protected many. It saved lives. Voldemort's failure to understand this was not just a moral failing, it was a strategic one. His paranoia became his undoing. The very Horcruxes he created to shield himself from death were hidden in places no one could access, guarded by magic no one could understand, because he didn't trust anyone with their protection. Not even Bellatrix, who thought she was entrusted with the cup of Hufflepuff. In truth, Voldemort never told her what it really was. He didn't trust her with the truth. And so, when Harry and his friends broke into Gringotts, they found it, because Bellatrix was too scared to question why they were there. Trust would have empowered her, but fear paralyzed her. In the final battle, Voldemort stood alone. His army was crumbling, his followers fled. Even the giants and werewolves, once bound by the promise of blood and chaos, had scattered. Only Nagini remained, and even she was a symbol of control, not companionship. He never saw her as a pet, as Hagrid saw Fang or Harry saw Hedwig. She was a vessel, a prison, a safeguard. And when she died, so did the last illusion of control. The irony is that Voldemort was right. People did betray him. Lucius abandoned him. Snape deceived him. Peter hesitated, but he never understood why. He never saw that his lack of trust caused the betrayal, that by treating people like tools, he invited sabotage, that by ruling through fear, he guaranteed rebellion. He could not see it, because to see it would mean acknowledging a flaw. And Voldemort did not believe he had flaws. At the very end, as he faced Harry in the Great Hall, Voldemort still tried to manipulate. "There are no more Horcruxes, it's just you and me, Harry." He offered truce, he offered mercy, but it was a lie. He had never known how to offer anything else. Trust would have made him vulnerable, and Voldemort would rather die than be vulnerable. Number 24. What role did Death Eaters play in taking over the Ministry? The night the Ministry fell was not marked by fireworks or explosions. There were no grand battles in the streets, no declarations of war. Instead, it was marked by whispers, by shadows, by cold hands guiding levers of power deep within the heart of the magical government. The Death Eaters, the devoted followers of Lord Voldemort, knew that to control the wizarding world, they needed not brute strength, but control over its laws, its leaders, and its lifeblood, the Ministry of Magic. And so they crept in, not with wands blazing, but with manipulation, threats, and dark enchantments that changed the very foundation of magical society. It began long before most even noticed. Underneath the leadership of Minister Rufus Scrimgeour, the Ministry projected an image of resistance, of holding the line against the Dark Lord. But behind closed doors, Death Eater influence had already begun to rot its structure from within. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the very body tasked with protecting the wizarding world from dark forces, was infiltrated. Subtle shifts in policy, questionable arrests, and the quiet disappearance of dissenters were the first signs that something was deeply wrong. Yet few dared to question the Ministry. To question it was to question the last remaining symbol of order. Pius Thickness was a name few recognized before the takeover. A mid-level bureaucrat, respected but not powerful. But the moment he fell under the imperious curse, he became one of the most dangerous men in the wizarding world. Acting under the control of Yaxley, a high-ranking Death Eater with access to the Ministry's top floors, Thickness was swiftly placed into Scrimgeour's inner circle. Pius Thickness is under the imperious curse, Arthur Weasley would later warn. He's not acting of his own will. But by then it was far too late. Thickness's placement wasn't random. It was a precise move, part of a larger strategy. With him under control, the Death Eaters could manipulate the flow of information, block communication between departments, and stall any meaningful resistance. The first to fall were those in leadership roles, people like Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, who had once stood firmly against Voldemort in the First Wizarding War. She was found murdered in her home, her death made to look like a casualty of war. In truth, it was an execution. Then came the murder of Rufus Scrimgeour himself. There was no grand announcement, no funeral worthy of a minister. He was tortured for information about Harry Potter and killed when he refused to yield. The Ministry released a statement. The minister had resigned, citing health reasons. In reality, his body lay broken in some dark corner, and Pius Thickness stepped into his role without a single vote cast. Inside the Ministry, the transformation was immediate. The statue in the atrium was replaced, Gone was the symbol of wizarding unity, replaced by the grotesque image of a witch and wizard towering above crushed muggle bodies. "Magic is might," the plaque read. It wasn't just a slogan, it was a warning. The Ministry had become the arm of Voldemort's regime, and its policies reflected that reality. The Muggle-born Registration Commission was established, led by Dolores Umbridge. Her pink cardigans and sugary voice masked a vicious cruelty that delighted in the persecution of the innocent. Muggle-born witches and wizards were summoned to the Ministry and accused of stealing magic from real wizards. Hermione Granger, disguised under Polyjuice Potion, would later witness these trials firsthand. "You are not a witch," Umbridge sneered at one terrified young woman. "You have stolen magic." It was a theatre of fear, designed to humiliate and destroy. Every department felt the cold grip of Death Eater influence. The Department of Mysteries, once shrouded in secrecy for the protection of magical knowledge, became a storage vault for stolen identities and dark artifacts. Records were altered, lives erased. In the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, werewolves were given free rein, particularly Fenrir Greyback, whose hunger for blood was barely disguised as state policy. He was rewarded for loyalty with permission to terrorize those who resisted. Even Hogwarts was not spared. With the Ministry under Voldemort's command, the school fell under new leadership. Severus Snape was named headmaster, and 2 Death Eaters, Alecto and Amicus Carrow, were appointed as professors. They didn't teach, they tortured. Muggle studies was turned into a propaganda class. Dark arts, once banned, was now mandatory. Punishment must be severe, Amicus would say, before forcing students to torture one another with the Cruciatus Curse. One of the most terrifying aspects of the Ministry's fall was how swiftly the public adapted. Witches and wizards began whispering in alleys, avoiding eye contact, terrified that any word spoken aloud might be overheard and twisted into evidence of treason. Children disappeared. Families were torn apart. The Daily Prophet became a tool of misinformation, praising Thickness's leadership and labeling Harry Potter as undesirable number 1. The Death Eaters did not need to fight battles in the open. They turned the system itself into a weapon. Auras were reassigned, their ranks filled with those loyal to Voldemort or too frightened to resist. Kingsley Shacklebolt, operating from the shadows, tried to warn those who would listen. "We are being watched. They are everywhere," he whispered to Arthur Weasley during a hurried meeting. "Trust no one." Resistance was punished brutally. Dirk Cresswell, an employee in the Goblin Liaison Office, was arrested for falsifying his blood status. He escaped only to be hunted down and killed. Ted Tonks, father of Nymphadora Tonks, was another casualty. A Muggle-born, he went on the run with fellow fugitives and died trying to protect others. Their names were rarely mentioned in public. They became shadows, symbols of what happened to those who dared to stand against the Ministry's new order. But perhaps the most chilling moment came with the silent compliance of so many. Co-workers turned on each other. Neighbors informed on neighbors. "He's a half-blood, I think," whispered one witch in the hallway of the Ministry, pointing toward a man who had worked beside her for years. Fear had replaced truth. Loyalty was measured by how many names you gave up, not by who you were. The control over the Ministry allowed Voldemort to hunt Harry Potter with unprecedented reach. Every movement was tracked, every home searched. "It is the decision of this Ministry," said Thickness in a forced address, "that Harry Potter is an enemy of the state." Posters were printed, bounties offered, and those who offered even the faintest help were imprisoned or worse. One wizard, caught giving Harry food while he was on the run, was sentenced to Azkaban within a week. The Ministry, once a beacon of magical governance, had become a nightmare. There were no elections, no debates, no justice. Everything was decreed from the shadows, with Voldemort's hand guiding every decision. When the trio, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, broke into the Ministry to retrieve one of the Horcruxes, they saw it firsthand. The air was cold, the corridors silent. Magic itself seemed heavier. Fear was alive in every room. Their mission revealed more than they expected. Hermione, disguised as Mafalda Hopkirk, sat through a trial that horrified her. The accused, a Muggle-born woman with 2 small children, was berated, accused, and sentenced before anyone even listened. "You will be escorted to Azkaban," Umbridge announced, her voice sweet as sugar, "and your children will be re-educated." There was no outrage. The other Ministry officials in the room nodded in approval. It was policy now, and yet, through it all, there were those who resisted, quietly, secretly, at great personal cost. Arthur Weasley sabotaged official memos. Kingsley Shacklebolt spread coded warnings. The Order of the Phoenix remained in hiding, moving from place to place, trying to protect those in danger. But they were few, and the enemy controlled the very laws that once protected them. The Death Eaters had succeeded not just in seizing power, but in reshaping reality. They blurred the lines between truth and lie, between justice and persecution. The Ministry didn't need to kill thousands, it only needed to make fear the law of the land. And in that they were terrifyingly effective. By the time Voldemort took full control, there was no ceremony, no grand throne. He didn't need one. The Ministry itself had become his instrument. The wizarding world had fallen not in battle, but in silence. And in that silence the Death Eaters ruled. Number 25. Do Death Eaters still exist after Voldemort's death? The fall of Lord Voldemort marked the end of an era of terror, but it would be foolish to believe that all traces of his influence died with him. The Dark Lord may have been vanquished at the Battle of Hogwarts, but the ideology he planted ran deep into the roots of the magical world. As Kingsley Shacklebolt took over the Ministry of Magic and attempted to rebuild a broken society, not every Death Eater was brought to justice. Some perished in battle, others were captured and sent to Azkaban. But a few, perhaps the most dangerous of all, simply vanished. Draco Malfoy, though once marked by the Dark Lord, was never truly one of them, and yet the shadow of his family's past clung to him like a cursed cloak. "My son is no Death Eater," Narcissa had cried, and in a sense it was true. But what of others who bore the mark proudly, who whispered their oaths in the dead of night, and who, even in the face of defeat, never abandoned their belief in pure blood supremacy? Take Thorfinn Rawle, for instance, a brutal enforcer in Voldemort's inner circle, known for his sadistic pleasure in hunting Muggle-borns. He was last seen dueling auras near the Shrieking Shack during the final hours of the battle. His body was never recovered. Some say he was vaporized in the chaos. Others believe he fled into the mountains of Eastern Europe, finding sanctuary among dark, wizarding enclaves. There, in crumbling castles forgotten by time, rumors speak of clandestine gatherings where the language of the old cause still burns in whispered incantations. Then there was Alecto Carrow, who, with her brother Amicus, had turned Hogwarts into a training ground for cruelty. Though Amicus was detained, Alecto managed to disappear during the siege. Her name appeared briefly on a list of fugitives, then faded from public record. Years later, a traveller from Hungary told tales in a pub near Diagon Alley of a woman with a serpent tattoo etched into her collarbone, leading rituals deep within the Carpathians. It is said she seeks a new heir, one who might one day take up Voldemort's mantle. The dark mark had not faded from their arms, not completely, Kingsley confided to Harry, according to sources within the Aura office. It grows colder sometimes, burns even, as if something is stirring. It was meant to be metaphor, but some took it literally. Goyle, bereft of his friend Crabbe, and lost in a world that no longer respected fear, tried to blend into society, but those who visited Nocturne Alley after dark claimed to have seen him entering Borgin and Burke's through a hidden door. What does he seek there? Cursed artifacts, talismans of dark power? The shop, once a haven for dark magic, was never truly shut down. Its wares simply grew more subtle, its patrons more careful. And Goyle was never known for being clever, so if he was there, it was not by his own design. Someone was pulling strings. Bellatrix Lestrange may be dead, but her legacy is not. In the far corners of the magical world, her name still evokes dread. She left behind a daughter, Delphine, born of Voldemort himself. While the events of the cursed child suggest her attempt to alter the past was thwarted, one must wonder what happened to her after that. Was she imprisoned again, rehabilitated, or did she vanish into the same shadows that once concealed her father? A young wizard named Julius Flint, nephew of the infamous Marcus Flint, was once overheard boasting in a Hogsmeade tavern. "The Dark Lord is gone, but not forgotten. He was a visionary. One day someone will finish what he started." Julius was later expelled from Durmstrang for conducting forbidden rituals. Last known whereabouts? Albania. In the old Lestrange Manor, now locked and sealed by the Ministry, a team of curse-breakers uncovered a library of ancient magical texts written in a dialect so old and twisted it made the eyes bleed. Among the scrolls were notes in Bellatrix's own hand referencing an artifact known as the Ashen Tongue, a wand core harvested from a basilisk reborn in fire. The Ministry denied its existence, but artifacts have a way of finding those who seek them. From time to time, strange symbols have appeared carved into the bark of trees in the Forbidden Forest, snakes devouring their own tails, a dark crown pierced with thorns, and once the unmistakable shape of the Dark Mark itself. Centaurs speak of movements beneath the earth, of whispers carried on the wind. "The forest remembers," Firenze told McGonagall gravely, "and so do the stars." In Paris, a duel broke out at a black market auction. Witnesses claimed that the attacker wielded a green flame, unlike any seen before. Liquid, yet alive, eating through stone and steel. The auction's item of interest? A fragment of Salazar Slytherin's lost diary. The attacker vanished, but left behind a single word etched in glass, purus, Latin for pure. Even among the new generation, Voldemort's ideology has found its way into whispered conversations and private clubs. At Ilvermorny's School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, a professor was quietly dismissed after it was discovered he had been lecturing students about magical superiority and advocating for the purification of bloodlines. His name? Caleb Travers, a descendant of one of the original Death Eaters. He disappeared before he could be questioned. Luna Lovegood once said, "Just because something is invisible doesn't mean it's not there." She wasn't speaking of Death Eaters, but the truth applies. The enemy today is not bold, not loud. It is subtle. It adapts. It teaches its children to speak softly, to smile, to wear the robes of civility while clutching the knife of vengeance beneath them. In the Aura office, there are files marked in red ink, high threat, unresolved. Names like Selwyn, Jugson, and Mulciber still haunt those lists. And then there are names without faces, aliases, shadows who never revealed themselves fully, who acted through proxies and masks. One codename, Scythe, appears over a dozen times in reports dating after Voldemort's fall. No one knows who Scythe is, or if he, or she, is even real. Some believe it refers to a future dark wizard, others claim it's metaphorical, but dark wizards have always clung to prophecy. Voldemort himself was shaped by one. Astoria Greengrass, wife of Draco Malfoy, feared the legacy of blood purity would consume her son. "Scorpius must grow without shadows," she once said, "but shadows don't vanish, they merely shift." Even now some whisper that Scorpius, brilliant and quiet, spends hours poring over books in the restricted section. Not for darkness, but for defense, because he knows, somewhere out there, the old evil still breathes. And what of the dark mark itself? Most who bore it claim it has faded to nothing, but George Dawlish, an aging auror who lost his son in the war, tells another story. "I saw a man in Knockturn Alley. His sleeve slipped. The mark was fresh, black as pitch. It moved. It pulsed." He tried to follow, but the man disappeared. "Like smoke," he said. "Or memory. It may not be an organization anymore. There are no weekly meetings, no rallying cries. But there is a network. Some call it the remnant, loose threads of a once-dead empire connected not by structure but belief. They share information through enchanted letters, trace dark objects through magical brokers, and offer sanctuary to the hunted. They do not seek open war, not yet. They seek a new path, a quieter rise. The magical world prefers the illusion of peace. It craves the comfort of forgetting, but forgetting is dangerous. Hermione Granger, now head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, once said in a speech, "Justice is not a single act. It is vigilance. It is memory." And yet memory fades. The Death Eaters as we once knew them may be gone. But evil, especially the kind that wears ideology like armor, never dies so easily. It molts. It waits. Voldemort was the serpent, but serpents leave eggs, and perhaps one night, when the moon is thin and the air sharp, somewhere far from Hogwarts a wand will rise and a voice will whisper, "Mors Mordre," and in the sky a skull will burn again. Would the world be ready? Or would we, lulled by silence, mistake the darkness for just another shadow? The Death Eaters, as an idea, as a whisper, as a sickness beneath the floorboards of the magical world, they still exist. Not many, not together, but waiting. Number 26, who remained dangerous even without Voldemort. The Dark Lord had fallen, and with him the vast machinery of fear and obedience that kept the wizarding world under a suffocating grip. Yet the disappearance of Voldemort did not bring safety. It brought something colder, quieter, the uneasy silence of predators no longer on a leash. Antonin Dolohov did not need a master. His wand was already a weapon forged by habit and bloodlust. Described as a broad, hunched man with a shaven head and a twisted expression, Dolohov had earned his place in Azkaban long before the Second Wizarding War. He had been a killer in the first. He was convicted for murdering Gideon and Fabian Prewett, two of the most skilled and courageous members of the original Order of the Phoenix. According to Moody, it took 5 of us to bring him in. That wasn't a boast, it was a warning. Dolohov did not shout spells like other wizards. His greatest strength was silence. In the Department of Mysteries, he fought the younger members of Dumbledore's army with a frightening elegance. His spell, a purple slashing curse with no incantation, sent Hermione Granger flying, nearly killing her. It was not a Vada Kedavra. That would have been too merciful, too fast. Whatever Dolohov used was designed to cut, to cause pain, to linger. It was this precision, this understanding of suffering that made him so feared. Even stripped of Voldemort's direction, Dolohov was a force of war, not because he sought power, but because he enjoyed the ruin it brought. Then there were the Carrows, Alecto and Amicus, names spoken in hushed disgust by the students of Hogwarts during the Dark Year. They were not generals like Bellatrix or strategists like Lucius. They were tormentors, sadists. When Hogwarts fell under Voldemort's regime, the Carrows turned classrooms into torture chambers. Amicus taught dark arts, not defense against them, and used Cruciatus curses on children for failing their lessons. Alecto, who taught Muggle studies, turned it into a hateful propaganda machine, forcing students to parrot lies about Muggles being animals. Neville Longbottom, once the shy and forgetful boy, became a quiet leader of the resistance during their reign. He bore the marks of his defiance. They used the Cruciatus curse on him, several times a week, whispered Seamus Finnegan. The Carrows didn't wait for orders. They didn't need a war to fight. All they needed was someone weaker than themselves. Even without Voldemort's shadow above them, the Carrows would have continued. They were wolves in teachers' robes, and they delighted in the taste of fear. Fenrir Greyback, though not technically a Death Eater by branding, stood among them with pride. A werewolf by birth, he had chosen a path darker than nature's curse. He preferred biting children, not during the full moon, not when he had no choice, but whenever it suited him. He had an arrangement with the Death Eaters. They gave him access, and he gave them terror. Remus Lupin once said, "Greyback is savage, even for a werewolf. He lives to infect, to spread the curse like a disease." It wasn't loyalty to Voldemort that drove Greyback, it was appetite. Even without war, he would have continued hunting, because some monsters don't follow orders, they follow instinct. Bellatrix Lestrange was a wildfire of cruelty. Even imprisoned in Azkaban, she never regretted what she had done. "The Dark Lord will rise again, Crouch," she shouted at her trial. "Throw us into Azkaban, we will wait." But what set Bellatrix apart was not her fanaticism. It was her joy. She didn't just kill, she revelled in it. Sirius Black called her deranged, and he wasn't wrong. After all, it was Bellatrix who tortured Frank and Alice Longbottom into madness, not for information, but as punishment. Long after Voldemort was gone the first time, Bellatrix remained a nightmare that haunted hospital beds. When she escaped from Azkaban, she did not hide, she celebrated. Her duel with Sirius in the Department of Mysteries was elegant, theatrical, until she whispered the spell that changed everything. Avada Kedavra. Sirius fell through the veil, gone in an instant. And Bellatrix? She laughed. "I killed Sirius Black," she screamed, as if it were an honor. In that moment, Voldemort's return was irrelevant. Bellatrix would have killed anyway. Her loyalty was not to a cause, it was to destruction itself. Thorfinn Roll was not as infamous, but no less dangerous. He was a heavy-handed enforcer, using strength and intimidation in place of subtlety. After Dumbledore's death, Roll became instrumental in tracking down the Order and its allies. When he and Dolohov encountered Harry, Ron, and Hermione in a London cafe, they attacked without hesitation. Dolohov stunned the waitress. Roll cast curses that shattered furniture and ceilings. They didn't speak. They struck. Like trained assassins, efficient and cruel. Even in Voldemort's absence, men like Roll had no plans of retreat. They enjoyed the chaos too much. Augustus Rookwood, once a spy in the Department of Mysteries, proved that information was a weapon as sharp as any wand. He had leaked secrets during the First War, allowing Death Eaters to strike at the heart of the Ministry. He wasn't loud or flamboyant. He didn't wear madness on his sleeve like Bellatrix. But his betrayal had led to countless deaths. Rookwood returned to Voldemort's side as an intelligence agent again, manipulating the structure of the Ministry from within. Even if Voldemort had stayed gone, Rookwood would have found another master, or become one himself. Because men who understand secrets know how to use them, no matter who sits on the throne. Mulciber was another shadow in the ranks. He specialized in the Imperious Curse, not for battle, but for violation. He once forced an innocent woman to torture her own family. He was a Death Eater, Snape had said. He specialized in the Imperious Curse. This was no ordinary dark magic. Mulciber made obedience an art form. He was not bound to Voldemort's cause by ideology. He was bound by opportunity. Without Voldemort, he would still find victims, because he didn't need a war to enslave. He only needed a reason. Even the younger generation bore the same seeds of cruelty. Pansy Parkinson, though never marked, encouraged violence. She cheered as students were punished. "I think they should be punished more," she said once, referring to those who dared defy the Carrows. When the final battle began, she was the first to call for Harry to be handed over. "But he's there. Potter's there. Someone grab him." It's easy to think of evil as grand gestures, as dark robes and curses, but sometimes it's the girl who smiles when someone else cries. The Lestrange brothers, Rabastan and Rodolphus, were quieter than Bellatrix, but just as committed. Rabastan was known for his cruelty during interrogations, Rodolphus for his tactical ruthlessness. They survived Azkaban, returned to Voldemort's side, and played their parts without hesitation. Yet even before Voldemort's return, their hearts had never changed. Some men do not need commands to cause pain, they simply need time. Even Severus Snape, once a Death Eater, was feared by many, not for his cruelty, but for his mastery. He created spells that others could barely understand, let alone block. Sectum Sempra was a spell of slashing shadows, capable of slicing flesh in a single stroke. Though Snape defected, the knowledge he possessed made him dangerous on either side. "You dare use my own spells against me, Potter? Yes, I'm the half-blood prince." A man who could invent his own spells had no need for orders. He was a weapon of his own design. Yaxley, a high-ranking Death Eater in the Ministry, used politics as a tool of destruction. He manipulated laws, arrested innocents, and installed fear through bureaucracy. Under his guidance, the Muggle-born Registration Commission became a horror show. Interrogations, confiscations, disappearances, all executed with a Ministry seal. Yaxley didn't wear a mask, he wore a suit, and he showed that evil didn't always howl. Sometimes it spoke in calm tones behind mahogany desks. Walden McNair, the executioner of magical creatures, found joy in death long before Voldemort returned. He was sent to execute Buckbeak, and it wasn't the act that disturbed others. It was the glee in his eyes. He had been a Death Eater in the First War, yes, but even afterward he remained close to the Ministry, hiding in plain sight. Men like McNair did not need rebellion, they needed permission, and when permission was no longer needed, they acted on impulse. Corbin Yaxley and Travers orchestrated several mass attacks on wizarding families. Travers was responsible for the murder of Marlene McKinnon and her entire family, an act done not for strategy, but cruelty. "He was one of the worst," Moody once said. "These were not soldiers, they were predators wearing the mask of politics and war. Voldemort gave them purpose, but even without him, they would have found victims. Some names are forgotten, their deeds buried beneath the louder legends. But the truth is clear. Voldemort did not create these people. He found them, molded them, yes, empowered them. But the darkness was already there. The wand was merely an extension of their desire. The wizarding world, even after the fall of the Dark Lord, was not safe from his followers, because monsters like Dolohov, the Carrows, and Greyback didn't serve out of loyalty, they served out of instinct. And instinct, unlike ideology, never dies. Number 29. Why did the Ministry ignore their return for so long? Cornelius Fudge stood behind his polished desk in the minister's office, hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his lime-green bowler hat. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting long shadows across the room, but none were as menacing as the shadow hanging over Fudge's mind. Albus Dumbledore had just delivered the news. Lord Voldemort had returned. Fudge had stared at him, eyes wide, disbelief etched across his face. "He's back," he whispered. But even then, he wasn't asking for confirmation. He was refusing to accept. The real danger wasn't that Voldemort had returned. The real danger, as Fudge saw it, was political. To acknowledge the Dark Lord's resurrection would be to admit that the Ministry had failed, not just in its vigilance, but in its duty to protect. It would shatter the illusion of security that had been so carefully constructed since the end of the First Wizarding War. The Wizarding world wanted peace. They needed to believe the nightmare was over, and Fudge was more than willing to lie to preserve that illusion. Lucius Malfoy knew this. That's why, after the Quidditch World Cup riot, where Death Eaters rampaged in the sky with the dark mark blazing above, he visited Fudge the very next day with a generous donation to St. Mungo's. It was hush money, really, a velvet-wrapped bribe to ensure the minister would continue turning a blind eye. Fudge accepted it with gratitude and denial in his heart. Just a few overexcited fans, he declared in the Daily Prophet, dismissing the event as a harmless prank. But others knew better. Harry Potter had seen Voldemort return with his own eyes. Cedric Diggory's lifeless body was proof enough that something had gone terribly wrong in that graveyard. But when Harry returned, shaken and bleeding, Fudge looked at the boy with suspicion, not sympathy. "He's lying," Fudge insisted, his voice rising to hysteria. "He's a disturbed child who's looking for attention." It wasn't just denial, it was self-preservation. Fudge feared the truth because truth meant change, and change threatened power. Dolores Umbridge, ever the vulture circling near weakness, fed into Fudge's paranoia. She whispered into his ear about Dumbledore's plot to take over the Ministry, insisting that the headmaster was using Harry as a puppet. "He's creating an army," she hissed. Fudge latched on to the theory like a lifeline. The idea of Voldemort returning was too monstrous to face, but the idea of Dumbledore trying to undermine him, that Fudge could fight. So the Ministry waged war, not against Death Eaters, but against truth. It began with the smear campaign. The Daily Prophet labelled Harry the boy who lies. Journalists like Rita Skeeter painted him as unbalanced, attention-hungry, even dangerous. "He's traumatized," one article claimed. His claims are a cry for help, not evidence. The public, hungry for comfort, eagerly consumed the lies. Meanwhile, the real Death Eaters regrouped. In the shadows of Knockturn Alley and the crumbling manors of Wiltshire, old alliances were reforged. Bellatrix Lestrange's escape from Azkaban should have been a blaring alarm, but the Ministry again downplayed it. A simple security breach, they said. They sent more Dementors to guard the prison, not realizing or refusing to realize that the Dementors themselves were turning. Kingsley Shacklebolt, an Auror who had always trusted his instincts, knew something was wrong. He watched as disappearances increased, as whispers of the dark mark crept through the alleyways. "We're seeing patterns from the old war," he told his superiors. But his reports were buried, misfiled, ignored. The higher-ups had orders from Fudge: keep the peace, or at least the appearance of peace. At Hogwarts, Dumbledore prepared for war. He revived the Order of the Phoenix, brought old allies like Mad-Eye Moody, Remus Lupin, and Nymphadora Tonks into the fold. "We must act where the Ministry will not," he told them. And they did, tracking Death Eaters, protecting Muggleborns, intercepting cursed artifacts. But they were few, and the enemy was growing. One night, in the Department of Mysteries, the truth could no longer be denied. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Neville, Luna, and Ginny were lured into a trap. Death Eaters appeared, real ones, masked and merciless, demanding the prophecy that could reveal Voldemort's fate. Bellatrix Lestrange taunted Harry with chilling delight. "He's going to kill you, little boy," she sang, moments before casting a curse that nearly crushed his spirit. Dumbledore arrived in a blaze of power. His duel with Voldemort in the Ministry itself should have shattered all illusions. But even then Fudge hesitated. He arrived to see Voldemort vanish into flame and shadow, and only then did he mutter, "He's back." The words tasted like ash in his mouth, but the damage had already been done. Months of inaction had allowed the Death Eaters to infiltrate every level of wizarding society. And now they were ready. Severus Snape watched it all unfold from his seat at the staff table. A double agent, tormented by past loyalties and present obligations, he understood what the Ministry could not. Denial was a weapon. Every moment they refused to believe gave Voldemort strength. "He's more dangerous in silence than in speech," Snape once told Dumbledore. And he was right. Rufus Scrimgeour, who later replaced Fudge, inherited a poisoned chalice. By the time he took office, the rot was already deep. "You've allowed them to take root," Dumbledore told him bluntly. "Now you will have to bleed to pull them out." Scrimgeour tried, but the Ministry was no longer a fortress, it was a battlefield. The Death Eaters had evolved. They no longer wore masks in alleys, they wore robes in the Wizengamot. Yaxley infiltrated the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Thickness, under the Imperious Curse, was placed as the puppet minister. Even the Aura Office was compromised. They didn't need to fight the Ministry. They became the Ministry. The turning point was the fall of the Muggle-born Registration Commission. Dolores Umbridge, draped in pink and dripping with venom, interrogated witches and wizards whose only crime was their birth. "You have stolen magic," she declared coldly. Her office, adorned with kitten plates, became a place of horror. And yet it was legal, sanctioned, official. The Ministry had become what it once vowed to fight. Hermione Granger, disguised and infiltrating the Ministry with Harry and Ron, was horrified by what she saw. "This isn't just corruption," she whispered. "This is tyranny." They stole the locket Horcrux from Umbridge, not just as a mission, but as a symbolic blow to the system that had failed them all. Perhaps the most tragic consequence of the Ministry's denial was the cost in lives. Emmeline Vance, killed in her own home. Amelia Bones, murdered in cold blood. An honest witch who dared to speak out. The werewolves, emboldened by Fenrir Greyback, hunted without resistance. The Ministry had left the people defenseless, and yet even as Death Eaters walked freely through Diagon Alley, there were those who refused to see. "It's not that bad," murmured shopkeepers, clinging to routine. "Things will return to normal." But normal had died the day Fudge chose silence over truth. In the end, it was not the Ministry that saved the wizarding world. It was students, outcasts, teachers, rebels. The Battle of Hogwarts was led not by auras, but by Neville Longbottom, by Molly Weasley, by the ghosts of all who had died in the name of denial. "We'll fight," Neville shouted, standing alone against Voldemort. And in that moment, he was stronger than any minister had ever been. When Voldemort finally fell, his body sprawled across the cold stones of the Great Hall. There was no triumph in the Ministry's corridors. There was shame. Kingsley Shacklebolt became minister that very night, and in his first address he said only this: "The truth should never be feared, it should be faced." And the room fell silent. The Ministry had not merely ignored the Death Eaters, it had enabled them. Through pride, fear, and political cowardice, it had created the very conditions for darkness to rise again. The lesson was etched into history like a scar. And scars, as Harry Potter would one day say, were not signs of weakness, but of survival. Number 30. Are there Death Eaters outside Britain? In the shadowed corners of the wizarding world, far from the moors of Britain, whispers echoed long after the fall of the Dark Lord. The lightning bolt scar might have sealed one story, but the ideology behind it, pure blood supremacy, the lust for power, the cult of fear, travelled farther than many dared to admit. Hogwarts was the stage, but the echoes reached Durmstrang, Beauxbaton, and perhaps even beyond. In Goblet of Fire, Victor Crumb, representing Durmstrang Institute, showed more than just his Quidditch skills. "Durmstrang does not admit Muggleborns," Hermione mentioned, eyes narrowed, her voice tinged with suspicion. The revelation was not merely a comment on school policy, it was a glimpse into an ideology silently growing, nurtured by the same seeds that sprouted the Death Eaters in Britain. Durmstrang, with its isolation in Northern Europe and focus on the dark arts, was fertile soil for extremist ideas. Igor Karkaroff, once a Death Eater himself, had risen to become headmaster of Durmstrang. It was no coincidence. During his trial, Dumbledore had sat grim-faced while Karkaroff pleaded, naming names in exchange for his freedom. Travers, he helped murder the McKinnons. Mulciber, he specializes in the Imperious Curse. But even after betraying his comrades, Karkaroff didn't abandon the darkness entirely. His appointment at Durmstrang suggested that, across the sea, the ideology had not only survived, it had institutional roots. Years before Voldemort's return, rumours swirled of a Balkan wizarding family, the Dragic clan, who practiced ancient blood rituals, fiercely guarding their pure-blood status. According to a retired Auror named Selena March, stationed in Macedonia in the late 70s, the Dragic patriarch kept a portrait of Gellert Grindelwald next to his hearth and a book bound in basilisk skin. The book, she claimed, was written in Parseltongue. The connection was tenuous but alarming. If Grindelwald had followers in the East, why not Voldemort after him? In France, Beauxbaton projected elegance and grace, yet within its marble halls not all students admired the ideals of tolerance. During the Triwizard Tournament, Fleur Delacour mentioned in passing that her grandmother was a Veela, an admission that drew sneers from some Durmstrang students, but also an icy glance from Madame Maxime. "They do not accept what is different," she told Hagrid, with a tremble in her voice. Could this have been more than prejudice, perhaps a reflection of foreign factions quietly sharing Voldemort's beliefs? The Ministry of Magic in Britain never publicly acknowledged the spread of Death Eater ideology abroad, but files leaked after the war hinted at international connections. One such file, heavily redacted and classified under Covenant Phoenix, suggested that a splinter group of Death Eaters had fled to Argentina in 1982, settling in an isolated magical colony near the Andes. These wizards, according to the document, continued studying dark spells and held annual rites in memory of the Dark Lord. A curious entry in Rita Skeeter's Noon with the Nefarious series described a reclusive wandmaker in Romania named Iancu Petrovic. Petrovic, once an apprentice of Grigorovich, was known for creating wands tailored for aggressive, even violent, magical purposes. "They ask for dragon heartstring," he told Skeeter, "but not just any dragon. Hungarian horntail. They want power, control, blood magic." It wasn't proof of Death Eaters abroad, but it hinted at customers aligned with their tastes. After Voldemort's return in Goblet of Fire, Dumbledore issued quiet warnings to foreign ministries. In a letter to the President of the Magical Confederation of Brazil, he wrote, "Where there is silence, the darkness thrives. The tendrils of this ideology are not confined by borders. It would be unwise to assume our war is ours alone." Yet many dismissed him, as Fudge had, fearing the economic consequences of open panic more than the ideology itself. In the American wizarding community, where MACUSA kept a tight grip on secrecy, there were whispers of the Obsidian Order, a group said to idolize both Grindelwald and Voldemort. An investigative piece in the New Salem Sentinel, buried in its 2003 archives, cited an informant known only as Wolf, who claimed the group met beneath the ruins of an old wizarding prison in Arizona. They wear masks of bone and speak of the bloodline awakening. I saw a child levitated and stripped of memory in a demonstration. They believe they are saving magic. The report was dismissed as hysteria. Lucius Malfoy once hinted, during a rare moment of reflection in Azkaban, that the foreign embassies were never useless. Some of them were more eager than we were. This line, scrawled into the margins of an Aura's confiscation log, was largely ignored until the Aura, Marcus Wilkes, disappeared during an assignment in Istanbul. He had reportedly been investigating a wizard named Sahin Uzun, an Ottoman-descended scholar of ancient magical bloodlines. Uzun vanished the same week, and both men were never seen again. The theory that Voldemort sent emissaries abroad was popular among underground magical scholars. One such name, Callista Travers, a cousin of the infamous Death Eater Travers, was believed to have travelled to Egypt in 1981 seeking lost resurrection rites in the catacombs beneath Alexandria. A scrap of her diary, recovered by a cursebreaker named Jamal Shafiq, read, "The blood of Horus awakens more than memory, it awakens loyalty." Was this loyalty to Voldemort or to the deeper forces he claimed to control? The idea that Death Eaters existed beyond Britain gained more weight when an unnamed informant from the Bulgarian ministry revealed that in 1998, during Voldemort's final months, a shipment of wands and enchanted weapons was intercepted on its way to the UK. The cargo included cursed amulets with runes not native to British magic. "It came from the East," the informant wrote. "Someone out there believed in the cause." Even within Britain, some foreign-born wizards aligned themselves with the Death Eaters. Antonin Dolohov, for instance, was said to have Eastern European roots. His spell work bore influences from Slavic blood magic, rarely taught at Hogwarts. "His curse burned the lungs from within," said Professor Flitwick in Order of the Phoenix. "It was not taught in our schools. It was older, crueler." Dolohov's origins suggested that the ideology did not simply spread from Britain. It may have imported cruelty from older traditions. The darkest whisper came in 2005 when a young witch named Ingrid Baum, a student at the Salzburg Magical Institute, was found practicing a ritual involving inferi in the school's catacombs. When interrogated by Austrian magical authorities, she allegedly cried, "The Dark Lord lives in the blood of the faithful." No link was proven, but the investigation uncovered a hidden library containing works once banned under Grindelwald's rule. Some of these bore marginalia in handwriting eerily similar to Tom Riddle's. Xenophilius Lovegood once wrote in The Quibbler, "Magic is like water, it flows, it adapts, and sometimes it carries toxins you cannot see until it's too late." Though most dismissed him as a madman, his metaphor seemed to fit the Death Eater legacy. Voldemort's movement, for all its secrecy, was less a cult and more a contagion, mutating, adapting, hiding in forgotten places, waiting for new hosts. An unsolved case from the South African ministry described a group of masked wizards attacking a Muggle safari in 1996. The survivors spoke of men in black whispering spells in a language not English. One Muggle, a linguist, claimed they were chanting Latin phrases about cleansing the world. The only clue left behind was a coin bearing the mark of a skull entwined with a serpent, not the dark mark, but reminiscent enough to spark fear. Kingsley Shacklebolt, in a private memo to the new Ministerial Council, once wrote, "Let us not assume the fall of one man ends the war. Ideas do not die as easily as bodies. If we do not chase them, they will return, wearing new masks." His words became the guiding principle of the International Dark Arts Task Force, formed in 2001. Their investigations led to multiple arrests across Europe, though no definitive foreign Death Eater group was officially acknowledged. A portrait in the Albanian ministry, hidden behind a tapestry of enchanted wolves, showed a gaunt young man in black robes surrounded by acolytes. An inscription below read, "He taught us the price of power, we paid it gladly." It was dated 1979, though the name was smudged out. Some scholars believed it to be an early image of Voldemort during his self-imposed exile, recruiting followers among the ancient wizarding tribes of the Balkans.